a lab exam, to having a lecture exam, they had all kinds of stuff that's due. All right, so does biology play a major role in sort of sex and love and connection and bonding? Yes. There's a lot of brain systems and regions, so specific neurotransmitters and hormones that are involved in this process. Things, and you guys talked about this yesterday, we were learning about this in the presentations as well. Dopamine, that's involved in sex, love, attachment, also reward, motivation pathways. Serotonin is involved in sex. Norepinephrine is also involved in sex. That's a neurotransmitter. That's part of the fight or flight, right, or the sympathetic nervous system. Oxytocin, we've talked about all throughout the semester off and on. You can guarantee that that's going to be on the final. This is released in multiple points throughout a person's life, in sex, orgasm, love, attachment, also with things like pregnancy, delivery, the induction of delivery or beginning that process, and nursing or breastfeeding. That is also a key hormone that's involved in that. A lot of research has looked at different areas of the brain to try to see which areas are key for love and attachment. And there's a couple specific areas called the VTA, or the ventral tegmental area. It's right here. It's at the top of the brainstem, sort of the midbrain, which is the top of the brainstem. So it's got a really primal, sort of deep brainstem anatomy, as well as the nucleus accumbens, which is right out here. So a little bit more going towards the frontal lobe or the frontal cortex, out along that track. And the orbitofrontal area, which is this lower frontal lobe part right there. Those are all really important in the physiology of love. These are also part of the reward pathways. Motivation, pleasure, drive, focus, addiction. A lot of those same pathways are involved in these other components of an individual. And there are brain scans that they do fMRIs, PET scans, all kinds of different things to look at the activity of these different areas. So there are a series of pathways. There are dopamine pathways in blue, and there are serotonin pathways shown here in red. Dopamine, again, we've got the VTA and the nucleus accumbens, and then this orbitofrontal area, and it goes all the way up, notice, to the cortex. These don't just stay in the brainstem or the lower ventral regions of the brain. They go up into the cerebrum, the higher cortical functioning area of the brain. So these are neurons, representing neurons that are connecting and releasing neurotransmitters. The main neurotransmitter that's being released in these pathways is dopamine. The main one in the red pathways is serotonin. And in general, these neurotransmitters have different functions. Dopamine is reward, motivation, pleasure, also involved in fine-tuning motor control. So in individuals with Parkinson's disease, this dopamine area, the substantia nigra, starts to degenerate and fall apart, and it results in poor motor control, or tremors and lack of being able to control motor function. Also, these pathways are involved in compulsion, so compulsory behaviors, and perseveration, so persisting and going towards a goal and reaching something, so motivation and drive. Serotonin, mood, so positive mood. A lot of antidepressants are actually affecting the serotonin pathways in the brain. Causes a positive mood or sense of well-being. Memory, has functions in memory, also some roles in sleep and cognition or thinking, functioning. So there are, if you guys have heard of different types of antidepressants like SSRIs, serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Okay, so preventing the reuptake of serotonin at synapses so that it stays longer out at that synapse and activates that next neuron to maintain those positive, pleasurable sort of mood or feelings. So that is directly related to the neurochemistry of the brain. What I will emphasize is not so much all the other components, but the VTA and the dopamine areas being involved in drug addiction. Tons of neurobiology research on this and psychiatry research looking at this. Sex and orgasm is also involving the dopamine centers of the brain, and also love is involving the dopamine centers of the brain. So that's really key to sort of all of these different processes in human beings. Similar, the brain is like a person on an opioid or like heroin. So if we look at brain scans of activity of people in love or have great attachment to someone else, it's very similar. Those areas light up. The brain activity of those recently dumped, believe it or not, Helen Fisher is a really cool, she's an anthropologist, psychologist, she has a really cool background. I have I have read a lot of her stuff and seen she's got some amazing TED Talks. So if you ever have time, just look up Helen Fisher, The Brain in Love, or Why We Cheat, or The Brain After Getting Dumped. She's done so much really cool like neurobiology research, and she puts people in scans, in these big giant MRI scans and CAT scans, and looks at their brain in association with these different things. So she's studied different areas of the brain and how they're affected. Believe it or not, people that are dumped, even like 6 months later, the same areas are still lit up. They don't let go of that attachment or that change. The pain of losing love, right? The pain of being dumped, it's a real thing. The brain is actually still being affected and focused in those same areas. So it's not easily diminished. The insula, which is deep inside the temporal lobes, so you've got temporal lobes right here. If you pull those open, the brain kind of deep inside of those cerebral cortex areas, that area is activated, and that is sort of involved in pain as well as other sensations. So it's kind of the pain of losing love. That area is really lit up. Looking at brain scans of lust, attachment or love, and romance, various different areas kind of get activated in different ways. But notice all kind of the brainstem areas, or the VTA and that nucleus accumbens, are pretty prominent. So long-lasting love couples that are together for a long time, have high activity in the prefrontal cortex, so up in the front, and that actually is associated with the suspension of negative judgment. So we negatively judge and criticize and look for flaws and look for issues, right? That area, high activity in the prefrontal cortex, sort of suspends or inhibits that type of behavior. It makes you sort of more open to forgive, and that's fine. Nobody's perfect, right? You suspend those negative critical things that we as human beings often tend to look for. It also is high in the calm and pain suppression areas of the brain. So higher in the more calming areas of the brain, and low in anxiety areas. And we're going to look at anxiety in just a couple of minutes. Other studies have found that couples that have better sex, believe it or not, and you guys talked about this in your presentation yesterday, and more orgasms throughout life, they actually report being more in love and have higher levels of happiness. So this directly links into what you guys presented. That sort of burst of dopamine and oxytocin and serotonin, all of that helps in the attachment process, and these individuals or these couples report greater happiness in general. So it makes sense, right? It makes intuitive sense, but the biology behind it sort of makes a lot of sense. And why would that be? So thinking about the hormones and the neurotransmitters that are released in this process and the feelings that they create, it makes a lot of sense why that would happen. So there's dopamine, serotonin, this little structure right here, oxytocin, vasopressin, which is ADH. It's known as antidiuretic hormone to a lot of biologists. And that right there is the pituitary, right? So it comes from the hypothalamus and gets released from the posterior pituitary. And then we have, yeah, okay. So those are the structures. Why do individuals fall for particular people and focus and put all their energy and wind up being together and committed for a long period of time? Timing, proximity, these are all the sort of research areas and things that are commonly found for why. Timing and proximity, so life cycles, life phases, proximity of where you are. Where are you on the earth? If you're not over in Europe, you're in California, you're never going to meet. So proximity and where you're at in your life and in space. Ethnic and socioeconomic backgrounds, similar intelligence. A lot of research studies have found that all of these things tend to line up, or a vast majority of these will line up in couples that find each other. Similar degree of good looks, similar level of education, similar religious and social values, core values, similar life goals, and basic attraction. So these are sort of some components that tend to, not in every case, but in most cases, are part of the reasons why people line up and get together. All right, why do people fall in love with who they do? Fisher has hypothesized there's different brain regions with certain neurotransmitter brain areas predominating in certain personality types. Now, for me, there's not a lot of hardcore biological evidence to support this. This is more personality traits and how people answer a series of questions and then what they gravitate towards in other personality traits. So it's not to say that if you are more of a dopamine type personality, that your serotonin, your oxytocin, and your vasopressin is dysfunctional. It's not saying that. We all have those key brain neurotransmitters and hormones. What she sort of is finding is that people sort of fall into one of four sort of groups that go along with the actions of those particular neurohormones. So she devised a personality test to study which types of people come together. Again, it's like a dating app. I did it for fun. You can sign up and create an account, and it's anonymous. You don't even have to. Just do an account, and you can take the little test and see how you fall. They use the data. If you go forward and use their little app, they use the data to see which people come together. Do you see that? So they rank you and they go, oh, you're a dopamine type, you're a testosterone type, you're an oxytocin, and then they see how people sort of find each other. And this doesn't matter whatever your sexuality, gender, any of those orientations. It's just what's on your filter, how you answer the questions, and then what people you actually end up with, or which ones you end up pursuing. And it's the scale of brain types. There's dopamine, the curious, energetic, adventurous, so that's like the explorer. So that's kind of her grouping of that. Serotonin is more cautious, norm compliant, sort of social, the builder. Testosterone, analytical, tough-minded, sort of the director. And then estrogen and oxytocin, pro-social, very empathetic, sort of more the negotiator type personality trait. And they found with the research and looking at this, and I don't know how many now, it's hundreds of thousands of people, probably more than 1 million now, how these people tend to line up based on these 4 brain area neurotransmitter little devised thing is dopamine tends to go with dopamine type, serotonin tends to go with serotonin type, testosterone tends to go with estrogen type, or estrogen oxytocin type. So that's how they sort of line up. So you can try the test, it's fun, it's free. You can just sign up and do it and then just kind of see what it pops out. I did it real super cheesy. I found out, okay, yeah, this makes sense. Explorer and dopamine, predominantly dopamine. Adventurous, curious, like want to do all that stuff. And then director as well, sort of those are the 2 common ones. I didn't do the actual app, I did it to do the test, but it's kind of fun. Yeah,
How do they actually know your hormone levels?
They don't. That is the key, thank you. So that's why I said this doesn't have a lot of biological basis. They're not taking you and taking your blood samples and looking at my brain in an MRI. It's based on a series of like, I don't know, dozens of questions. It's how you answer the questions. They give you scenarios, they give you topics, they give you associations. It's how you answer it and how you think. So you're absolutely right. It is not to say I have more dopamine than somebody else, and so I'm a dopamine sort of personality type. The interesting thing is just like a lot of these other personality and love types, or like if you're an extrovert or an introvert, or there's a lot of these different categories sort of things, and they're really based on psychology and not biology. So that's why even when I was learning more about it, I was like, yeah, well, you don't truly know. You know, am I really predominating in those different areas of the neurochemistry of the brain? So that's a really good point. It's just fun. And it kind of just, and they found there's correlations. It doesn't mean it's causative. There's a correlation. Like those types of personality people kind of are attracted to each other. This one is the 5 languages of love. You guys have probably heard by Chapman. I don't know if you guys have ever done this.
Yep.
Have you done it? You know what you are?
Yeah. I'm quality.
Words of affirmation, quality time.
And physical touch.
So for me, it was really interesting. I did not do this until I was in my 30s. The book came out a long time ago, originally in '95, and then wasn't that big of a deal, and then got a lot of attention, and then all over the place. You can easily just try the little test, go on the site, just log in, do a little free thing. And for me, when I finally did it, it made a lot of sense. It made a lot of sense why I had issues in certain areas and with certain people. They wanted one way, love a certain way, and I was like, that makes no sense to me. That's not love to me. So just the way you prefer to be loved and give love and get love and receive and treatment and all that stuff. Words of affirmation, this is like positive comments saying, you're amazing, you're smart, I'm so lucky, you know, all of that. Acts of service, like doing stuff, like fixing stuff for you, bringing you stuff, you know, making it easier for you in your life. Receiving gifts, that's obvious, right? I don't even care about that. That's so funny. I was like a 1. And I'll buy my own stuff. If I want something, I'm going to go buy it. I don't need that. I can't give these other things to myself, but I can give myself gifts. I can do that. Quality time, spending time with the individual, no matter what you're doing, that good quality there. Physical touch, so that's explanatory, right? Actual touch. And this is funny because some people are very touchy. I'm sort of touchy, and I have to not be because I know it can be weird. I'm like, hey, and they're like, ooh, no, what are you doing? Or I slap and want to do like high fives. Some people don't like that. Some people are not. My ex didn't like to hold hands. I did not like to hold hands. I mean, I'd be like, hold my hand, and he'd do it for like 2 seconds, and be like, okay, my hand's sweating. That was not his thing. So it wasn't surprising when I was high here, and he was very low there. I was like, we thought about this. this is why. So, I mean, it was just a little insightful to do this. So if you take the test, it's free, 5lovelanguages.com if you've never done it. For me, it was insightful. It's just interesting to do. Again, this is not based on hardcore science and biology and stuff. It's just types of personalities and the way you like to give and receive love. Okay, so that just goes over all of the 5 languages. Love is a major part of the human experience, but it's really kind of built right into our core. I would argue dating back over 1,000,000 years of sort of setting us up as human beings for our social intricate networks and how we are with each other. And if you're alone as a social creature, it's real hard to survive. If you're with other people and you have tight-knit, good bonds and social networks, you're going to have a better success in surviving and thriving, right? So it's kind of built into who we are. And why you choose, who you do and why, all these different things, of course, learned and acquired behaviors, as well as proximity, personality types and traits, the types of love that you prefer, underlying genes and pheromones, we talked about that, chemistry and attraction also as well. So although it's biological, social, nature, and nurture, it's still a really amazing thing that we're finally starting to learn more about. So more than just a philosophical level, we're learning it now more on a biological or scientific level. I just thought this was really cute. Two people there saying, I love you. There's a funny little joke. I'll just put this up before I go to the stress. I thought it was hilarious. Because you see all these evolutional things, just hilarious. Okay, thought I'd share that. Now, we are going to go on to disease, and a lot of these diseases